Record, Alice, when you're ready.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
So, hello everyone, and welcome to AALL's first event of the year for Connect.Inspire. So, if you didn't just get the notification, this meeting is being recorded, and we will be able to hopefully send it out to the people who are not able to make it, and also if you wanted to review anything. So, keep that in mind. Also, please keep in mind that we do have a live transcript available. So if you go either into the chat box, you'll see the instructions of how to turn it on. So you have to turn it on yourself. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Tiana. For those who haven't met me or know me yet, I am one of the committee members for AALL, and I'm also a learning advisor at the University of Adelaide and a PhD student at Macquarie University. So today I would first like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all are on today. I'm in Adelaide, so that is the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So feel free to put in the chat box where you are all coming from and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. So how the session is going to run. So in a minute, I'm going to introduce our lovely guests, Shona and Orla. And then what will happen is they will speak on this great topic, which you've all seen from the email invite, for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we are going to go into a 30-minute discussion in breakout rooms, and Shona and Orla might have a break for a little bit, go get a cup of tea, or they might come in and also chat in the breakout rooms. It's completely up to them. And then we're going to come back together as a group, and we're going to have a larger Q&A session with Shona and Orla, and also a further discussion on any other topics that came up in our individual breakout rooms. So you will be put into individual breakout rooms. It's just going to be randomized.
I can't hear you. Do I need to? No.
Okay. And just double check that everyone's on mute as well when the presentation begins, because the live transcript is on, we'll be able to see it. Okay, so I'd just like to introduce and welcome on behalf of myself and the executive committee, as well as the committee on the events team here. So that's Steve, May and Alice. Shona Edwards, who is a master's candidate in classics at the University of Adelaide. And outside of university, she works as a youth cancer advocate and is a consumer representative on several health and medical committees. We then also have Orla Spur, and she is doing a Bachelor of Health and Medical Science. She's also at the University of Adelaide, and she has a particular interest in public health and medicine. And Orla advocates for the lived experience involvement in service design. Shona and Orla are president and vice president of the Student Club, the Disability, Illness and Divergence Association, which was founded last year at the University of Adelaide, also known as DIDA. DIDA is a social club where chronically ill and neurodivergent students can find peer support. So DIDA advocates for disability in higher education, as for disability equity in higher education. Okay, so let's get started. Shona, if you'd like to start to share your screen.
Yep, I'll also just draw up. We've got a handout that's not necessary to understand the presentation. It's just extra resources if you're interested in some of the things that we mentioned along the way.
Great, thank you.
Just share
Going
screen.
to pop that in the chat box for everyone.
Okay, here we go. Okay. We all good there? Okay, so thank you, Tiana, for introducing us, and thank you to the organisers of this session for inviting us. We want to acknowledge that we are also speaking to you from Kaurna country today, and we recognise the Kaurna people as traditional custodians of this land that we live and work on. It's our intention today to present you with the student experience of navigating university systems and the ways that students attempt to advocate for themselves and each other. We believe this can inform how you deal with students or postgraduates, or even your fellow academic and professional staff. Some of what we discuss will relate to teaching, some of it's about supervision, and some of it's relating to mentoring. And what we tell you today is based on our own experiences, and we've learned the things that we've picked up along the way the hard way, not through being trained. Ola and I are both disabled and neurodivergent students, and in our role advocating for disability equity, we're often asked what teaching staff and advisors can do today to immediately start making change. It's important to understand the limitations of the official procedures and policies that are in place at most institutions, because it's these barriers which students at all stages will face when they try to register with disability support and get the accommodations they need. So to put us in context, we'll give you a snapshot of the University of Adelaide for an example of an institution. The University of Adelaide reports 10.6% of the student population identified themselves as disabled at the point of enrolment in 2019. So this is above the national average for undergraduates of 7.7% in 2019 as well. Of course, this is inevitably an undercount of the students who have support needs, but maybe don't self-identify as disabled. For those who are counted at Adelaide, we have a grand total of 3 disability advisors. There is to date no mandatory or voluntary disability awareness training or accessible teaching practices training at Adelaide. And I encourage you to seek out the statistics at your own institutions. In order to register with disability support at Adelaide, students have to complete a long verification and impact statement form with their general practitioner or a medical specialist. In theory, this gives them a disability access plan, which gives 5 days extension on work without question. In practice, students have to have the confidence to ask for those 5 days, and sometimes it is questioned or a judgment is made even if they are granted the 5 days. If they want extensions beyond 5 days, there's another form to complete every time they need that, regardless of whether they have a disability access plan through disability support or not. And the financial and social barriers to getting medical and psychological assistance outside of university are extreme. If a student cannot afford an ADHD or an autism diagnosis or a GP or a specialist appointment, then they can't complete the forms to register with disability support or apply for those extensions. If a student has an unsupported family, how do they self-advocate when their self-esteem is in tatters? Psychologists and specialists are expensive and have months-long, sometimes years-long waiting lists, particularly in Adelaide. We're quite isolated. Because of the issues of getting a diagnosis, many students and staff who need support don't even have the language to describe themselves and to ask for the help that they need. So with these barriers in mind, our association DIDA has been collecting feedback from students on a range of issues. We've consulted with the University of Adelaide in several areas and provided that feedback to a number of student services and programs. And there are common experiences that keep cropping up from students. And I want to note, less than half of our membership have actually registered with disability support, and at least a quarter after that say that they're considering it, but haven't yet made that move. One student wrote to us, quote, "I'm not being believed about my neurodivergence, as I'm still waiting for a formal autism diagnosis. I'm on disability, but for my mental health, and it's difficult to be believed without medical evidence," end quote. Another says, quote, "My issues are complicated, and I don't have one single unifying diagnosis. I had to rely on extension requests and generally multiple extra trips to my GP to get the forms filled out correctly," end quote. And another, quote, "Attempting to apply for extensions with mental health condition is difficult and arduous, and in itself can contribute to the exacerbation of the condition," unquote. So again and again, we hear students invoking Centrelink, invoking work pressures and family pressures. They doubt themselves, and they've been burned in the past, and they really fear trusting services when they've been failed. The very conditions that students need to complain about are the same conditions that make it difficult to complain. When students seek help, there's also the significant burden of disclosure. And we want to focus in on the confidence needed to ask for support, whether through a disability access plan or not, by giving you a specific example from Ola. All right. you want to jump in?
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, now you're.
Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to try not to make this too arduous of an anecdote to listen to, but the whole purpose of me sharing it is to give some idea of the amount of admin and back and forth and disclosure that disabled students have to perform every time we need even the smallest accommodation. So last semester, one of the courses I did was an anatomy thought course, which had a weekly lab session in the pathology labs looking at specimens. Because the lab has safety concerns, part of the induction that you do at the beginning of every semester for courses in the labs is to watch a video as a group and to do an online quiz showing that you understood the video. So this is usually just basic safety induction stuff, knowing where the fire exits are, agreeing to always wear PPE and closed shoes. However, one of the requirements that I noticed in the past couple of years that is always mentioned in this induction video is that there are no chairs in the lab and you're not allowed to sit down. I believe this is because chairs are seen as a potential trip hazard, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because every year there seems to be at least one first-year student who passes out. If you drive down Frome Road in March, you will probably see an ambulance there at one point. And I'm sorry for anyone who doesn't have much background in health or medical sciences. I'm a little bit desensitized to talking about anatomy labs, so I will try to be aware of that. So yeah, at this point, it's kind of an expected reaction that there's usually one student at least who passes out every year. You know, they're difficult circumstances to be in for the first time. You're seeing your first cadaver. There's the smell of formaldehyde in the air. It's in a basement, so it's pretty cold and there's a pressure differential. So some of the advice that they always give is to make sure you eat and drink enough before you go, because people often get dizzy and it's not a very comfortable environment. And you're told that if you start feeling dizzy, you should sit on the floor. But then not to sit on the floor too often, because then you become a trip hazard. It's a bit confusing. So last semester, my fatigue and dizziness was worsening, and I noticed I was struggling to pay attention in the lab, and I was worried I would pass out. As much as passing out is not that abnormal for a first year, for a third year, it's a bit weird. So I realized that I really needed a chair so that I could make the most of this class. The attendance is mandatory, but it's also where I learn the best as a practical learner. So for this course, we had 1 day a week of in-person teaching, which went from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. The first half was in the computer rooms upstairs and the second half down in the anatomy labs. There wasn't really an opportunity to eat lunch, especially now that masks are required in all the classes, and that probably did contribute to my symptoms. And all of that kind of came together to mean that the busiest time of my week was spent in the most unsuitable location, trying to learn the most difficult topic. It might seem that just asking for a chair is like a really simple thing to do. But I didn't know how to go about asking for it. I knew from previous practical exams that it can be hard to get accommodations in the lab, given that it's a professional environment and all this. So I spoke to my course coordinator at the end of one of our computer sessions, maybe it was like week 3. And I end up disclosing to him what's going on, as it's just easier to communicate my request that way. Although, to be honest, in this situation, it was not that much easier because I don't have a diagnosis. I don't really have a reason that he would easily understand. So he didn't see why I would be nervous to ask or why it would be a big deal. He told me to just speak to the lab staff when I go downstairs. Just for some context, these lab staff, they're people I've seen for a few years, but I've only ever really interacted with them when I'm running late and I get told off. I'm sure they're lovely people, but yeah, safety in the lab is a serious issue. So I mentally prepare myself to ask them, but when I go downstairs on that day, they're not there because they're prepping a new specimen. The way that these lab sessions are set up, there's 6 rotations and 6 groups rotating between them. So I have to leave the rotation and pull aside a demonstrator who's trying to teach the other students in order to ask for this accommodation. And when I speak to him, I don't really want to disclose exactly what's happening. So I decide to just allude to the issue by asking who I can speak to about accessibility. He takes this to mean that I'm asking about like swipe card access. And so he gives me an answer relating to that. And then after, a minute or two, I kind of realize there's been a misunderstanding. And then I end up disclosing to him and explaining to him what's going on. And he's concerned, and he tells me, the lab workers, their emails should be on the website. Just, they'll understand, they'll be friendly and fine. Just look for their emails and then email them. So at this point, I've disclosed to 2 people. So before the next week, I look for the emails, and they're not on the lab website. So I email my demonstrator again. I email my course coordinator again, and they don't reply until like just before the next session. And when I speak to my course coordinator, he says that actually he did CC in the lab staff, and they have replied to me. But when I check my emails, I see that actually what's happened is my course coordinator has forwarded my email, which describes what's going on with me and my health, to a bunch of lab staff just directly. So now all those people have also been disclosed to. I felt uncomfortable, but I just didn't want to make a big deal out of it, because the way that uni has treated me has made me feel like I'm already asking for too much labor just by asking for a chair. So I don't want to make it more of an issue. So he's emailed me, they've emailed him back, they haven't emailed me back, which is why I didn't know. And so when I get down there, I do eventually, finally, it's been a few weeks now, I finally get to speak to one of the staff, and they grab me a chair. It is, after all, super easy. But again, I'm disclosing, I don't know these people's names. I'm sure they're lovely, but people who work in morgues, like generally there is a little bit, there's a little bit of an intimidating air to the whole situation. So for that week, I have a chair. I have to drag it between the stations with me, which defeats the purpose of a chair a little bit. But, I just go with it. I'm glad that I have this thing that I've been trying to get for a few weeks. But then I get to one station, and one of the demonstrators looks at me and says in front of everyone, "Oh, did you forget to have your lunch today?" Implying that like I need the chair because I've made a stupid mistake. I kind of laugh it off, but I'm uncomfortable with the attention. And then I realize that I can't see what's happening at the station when I sit in the chair. So the stations are done at these tables that are kind of like, again, they're like morgue tables. So they're quite high and they're steel. And the demonstrator is holding a specimen and like pointing to it. So normally you kind of walk around and get different angles because it's a 3D structure. But when I'm sitting in this chair, not only is it too high, I also can't move around. So I kind of, honestly, I drag the chair around me with me for a few weeks, and I kind of stand over it. But eventually I just give up on having the chair because it defeats the whole purpose of me being there. So yeah, and in the next few weeks that I do try and use the chair, a few more demonstrators ask me what's going on, a few more students ask me what's going on, and I end up disclosing to easily half a dozen people in this random class. So I just, it's such a simple request. But I guess the reason that I told the whole anecdote is just to show that a very simple request tends to require a lot of back and forth, a lot of admin, a lot of privacy concerns. Teachers always think, why does it bother you if I know that you have fatigue? And it's just like these thoughtless things, these reply alls, these forwarding of my personal health information, just all this stuff it does come together and make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. So yeah, that's that anecdote.
So we want to give you some things that you can do to build habits or work towards more accessible teaching and mentorship. So one of these things is an inclusive or inclusivity learning statement, which you can provide if you're teaching at the beginning of a syllabus. It's something you say at the start of a course in the first lecture, or something you provide in several places if you've got a Moodle or whatever platform your institution uses. It's also something you can say at the start of a mentoring session or on the websites of services like writing and math centers. This is more than just giving information about disability support at your institution. It's taking the time to say something to students like, everybody learns differently and we all use different tools to do so. You may have support needs even if you don't identify as disabled. So I've got 2 examples on the PowerPoint slides and in the handout. This one's from the course Latin and Greek Scientists, run by Professor Han Baltussen at Adelaide. He's included a number of resources here under the heading Wellbeing. And if we zoom in, we can see underlined that he's clarified any health condition that impacts your studies is relevant, even if you would not call that condition a disability. And we can't understate how important it is to demystify disability support at your institution and clarify who is eligible and how they can access that support. So many students aren't aware that disability is there, or they think it's not for them. If a student can't register for disability support, perhaps due to the barriers I mentioned before, it's vital to link to other services like counselling, wellbeing, student life, student care, that kind of thing. The other example we have is from our Bar Smith Library, which provides short online courses on study skills, where an accessibility statement has been included in the front matter. We connected with an academic support librarian who put this material together, and she serves as a champion for us in her sphere of influence within our library. Now, this course is called Library Essentials, and she opens this statement by saying, quote, "The University of Adelaide believes that education needs to be available to everyone. This means supporting the creation of accessible educational resources. We are actively committed to increasing the accessibility and usability of the materials we provide." So she makes a point of acknowledging, while we strive to ensure that all our content meets different learning needs, we might not always get it right, and prompts students for issues regarding the content in this course or to identify non-functioning items, please contact us. The statement also lists the accessibility features that are available for the content, which is so important when students might not know what they need, might not yet have any idea of what works for them or what features even exist for them to try. If this academic support librarian hadn't been a champion for us, this would have been perhaps a one-sentence statement. It could have had a defensive tone, and it would have been relegated to the end of the page, not proudly sitting at the top. And small changes add up. It's been shown that providing this information up front, along with reminders when you talk about extensions or late penalties, effectively communicates that you are safe to approach. There is also evidence that putting a similar statement in your email signature can reach students better than in lecture material or on the Moodle. An email is often the first point of contact. And we've got a link to further resources on inclusive learning statements on the handout, and we encourage you to personalize it in your own words. I want to have a note of caution here, or perhaps a note on the limitations of inclusivity statements. Institutions can use commitments to principles as evidence of their action towards something like equity, inclusion, safety in the workplace, and more. However, stating a commitment to inclusion does not necessarily mean that substantial effort is being taken in practice towards inclusion. Some administrations will wield their policies and commitments like weapons against those who argue that not enough action is being taken. We must follow through by having access and understanding underpin everything we do. One way to do so in the most basic sense is by making material accessible. Some of this is about building habits. It's things like describing the information that's on screen verbally during presentations and lectures. It's providing alt text on images in PowerPoint, Word, as well as in your tweets and other social media posts, which is where a lot of networking happens. It's getting comfortable with editing the auto-generated transcripts and captions of a recorded presentation or lecture. Often there are discipline-specific issues with those auto-generated materials. For example, in my area of classics, the programs will not understand ancient Greek and Latin, and screen readers won't understand them either. So you need to discover the ways that you can make your discipline's material accessible. Next, ask your students, do consultations even on an individual basis, and make what you've learned available to your colleagues where it's appropriate confidentiality-wise. Make contact with student groups like ours and get to know them. Many students, but especially disabled students, miss the opportunities to complete student evaluations on teaching because those get sent out, as we know, during the busiest time of semester, which for disabled students is often the time we spend in the most pain, under the most stress, and in a state of panic or fear. Even weeks after that busy time, even months after, disabled students are recovering. So I think it's important to make clear that you are interested in taking feedback, even if that happens at a later date. As I mentioned earlier, a statement expressing commitment to inclusion does not automatically equate to work towards inclusion. And in terms of student feedback, Sarah Ahmed's words from her monograph Complaint come to mind. Quote, "You can preserve a view of the institution as inclusive by not including the views of those who would challenge that view. In other words, the more you exclude, the more you can appear inclusive," end quote. One of the most important things is that you take what students say they're struggling with at face value, believe them even without documentation. The risk of a student taking advantage of allowances is not worth traumatizing a student who is reaching out for help and putting their heart on their sleeve. We know you have to follow procedure in your institutions, but we ask that you show compassion at that first point of contact, discussing an issue at that first disclosure, without assumptions. Whether or not the university can accommodate the students' needs, you can validate the struggle and the strength it took for them to ask for help. Don't start the conversation by saying there's a form they need to fill out. Be generous in your approach and assume the best, and be prepared to think about the situation in more than just black and white. Often the forms don't have the right boxes for complicated individual situations. We need to emphasize that sometimes the students you approach to ask for feedback on access don't have the capacity to give you that. And we ask that you respect their choice to preserve their energy. Sometimes student advocates can speak on behalf of a collective, like we do for DIDA's membership. We collect feedback anonymously and present it in a way that the university will understand. Next, we ask that you agitate at your institutions to provide disability awareness training or training on accessible teaching practices. Or you can seek it out yourself or for your organization or service. One workshop does make a difference, and we can't train you in everything today. We can only flag that the material to help you already exists out there, and you do need to be shown to use the tools and programs that allow equal access. The Australian Disability Clearinghouse for Education and Training frequently run events on inclusive teaching practices, professional development, and more, and we've included several links to their resources on their website in our handout. They have a webinar coming up on supporting students with ADHD next week, I think. When talking to staff about disability, we talk about how difference is enriching. Disabled students aren't just a source of financial gain for the institution as enrollment increases, they're an underutilized source of research and scholarship. Students with disabilities and chronic illnesses have perspectives that others might not have. The way they understand themselves, the way they relate to each other, the way they connect to and navigate the land and environment and animals is different, and those perspectives are so valuable. If we don't accommodate support needs, and if we apply a moral judgment to those who do need support, then we're losing that value that can enrich our departments. We've seen the level of investment in re-engaging with international students. Disabled students are an investment in the same way. That work isn't an additional burden, it's just the work. Understanding accessibility will also become an expected skill for all of us as global citizens, and we want Australian universities to lead that charge. There are also significant benefits here to institutional reputation. In the meantime, while we wait for improvements to the support disabled students can get, what we've discovered at DIDA is the value of peer support. It can be hard to find each other at university, especially when it's mostly running online. Many of us aren't openly disabled or haven't disclosed that to our friends or even perhaps to family. Many of us are just discovering chronic illnesses, disabilities, and mental health conditions because of the pressure and environment of higher education. So we don't know how to connect with support. It does take work to find each other and to make environments suitable to facilitate peer support. But once you have that structure, peer support allows students to self-regulate a little and soothe each other's anxiety and alienation, which is ever increasing as universities face increasing cuts. Peer support is encouraging each other when we face challenges. It's support in more explicit terms when we direct each other on how to register with disability support, what accommodations we can ask for, and just to encourage each other to ask for extensions, reach out to staff, and flag that there's a problem. Sometimes this can mean telling each other which staff are safe to disclose to. I want to note here that peer-assisted learning programs available to students were not designed with disabled students in mind, nor are they accessible to many of us. becoming a peer mentor is incredibly competitive, and many of those students who do are driven by the need for extracurriculars on their resumes. Because getting involved is so dependent on academic performance, those programs are missing out on the valuable knowledge that many of our informal mentors in DIDA have and are keen to pass on. There is so much community knowledge held by the disability community that is not being put to good use because the structures and programs currently in place are not open to us. The students who seek help from those programs are often already confident enough or have the capacity to advocate for themselves, unlike many who are burdened by shame and fear. So we have to work on the fringes and work flexibly. And until official programs accommodate us, we'll continue to do that work, unpaid, untrained, and unrecognized. Above all, we think it's important to remember that, as always, we exist within institutions that serve the students who are the academics of the future. And each of us does have our own sphere of influence to make change. If you're already working towards treating difference as enriching, which we suspect by attending this panel you are, then we ask that you please carry these messages beyond this space and carry the resources too. On the handout, we've got some more resources and recommended reading. Please note the Dolmage book, Academic Ableism, is open access as a PDF or audiobook free through Audible, and Sarah Ahmed's lecture on complaint for the Wheeler Centre is essential viewing for anybody interested in promoting diversity and inclusion at your institutions. And she speaks about how those who advocate for change are treated. It's an important reminder of the time and energy costs to advocacy. And it's also on the recommended resources, ADCAT also have a list of reasonable adjustments for specific conditions if that's something relevant to your sphere. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. I'll stop screen sharing.
Thank you, Shona, and thank you, Orla, for both presenting today and sharing that information. As someone who is dyslexic and immunocompromised as well, I do really, have a lot of empathy for everything that you guys are doing, and because it's hard, it's really hard for students out there who are disabled and neurodivergent to exist in the space. So everyone, we are going to go now into breakout rooms and have a 30-minute discussion. So you're about to receive a prompt, hopefully by Alice. And yep, recording in progress. Okay, so we're all back, I think, and we're going to be ready now for a Q&A. So Shona and Orla, if we're going to start the Q&A now. Steve, is there any particular way that we would like to format this? Do we want to put questions in chat box, or that might be easier than unmuting ourselves or raising your hand and we can sort of go in
either or, whatever people feel comfortable with. I'll lead off if it's okay. We were just discussing in our breakout room about whether, and if I and we missed this, apologies, but is there an internationally recognized symbol for disability or for allying with disability to show on your email signature, like there is for Indigenous and LGBTQI allies? Is there such a thing?
Good question. I do not know of one. I would say, this is a reason why we have such a mouthful in our name, because we're disability, illness, and divergence, and we also accommodate mental health conditions. I think it's okay to use the symbol for disability if you're clarifying that you're a safe person for that purpose. So that it's not misunderstood that you're saying you're disabled, if that makes sense. Because that would be my concern, is if you put that symbol in.
Unfortunately, the quick Google search I did sort of revealed the old wheelchair one, which I have no problem with, but it's very much partial to the story, isn't it?
Yes.
I wonder if there's an icon which was a bit more embracing than that, but if anybody comes up with one, please share with everybody. I think we'd all love to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we'll have to keep our eye out for.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I actually have a question from our breakout room for Shona and Orla, and maybe we can open up this discussion to everyone, is what's the preferred terminology? should we be saying disability and disabled, or should we be saying disability and access, or should we say equity? You know, what's a better way to encapsulate, you know, the broad spectrum of students?
Yeah, I think, like I've said, a lot of students don't identify as disabled, but it is the term is useful politically, and the term is useful to get funding and services sometimes. So I think, you know, when we say 10% of students at Adelaide are disabled, that gets people's attention. We tend to say health conditions that affect your study when we're just trying to encompass everything as briefly as we can. I know in terms of, you know, language, there's the choice between person first and identity first language, and that's really a preference that individual disabled people can make. And like I just said, disabled people, that's my preference. Everyone I meet says they don't really mind. And, you know, I would say just take the cues from who you're talking to when in terms of what you say. But yeah, Orla, do you have anything you might add there?
Yeah, I guess the using the word disability, it is important as well, just for clarity, because if you say inclusion or diversity or equity, like so many of those programs don't think about disability. So as a disabled person or a person with a chronic illness, you can't really just assume that that's for you, because so often it isn't. So I guess, yeah, speaking about disability is important because it recognizes that we're here. It is a bit of a contentious issue. Like, personally, I don't really have a preference between person first and disability first. I think most HR departments will say to do person first. I guess if you're not disabled yourself, it is probably safer to like revert to person first unless someone else says otherwise, because that's kind of been the norm for a while, but it is changing. And personally, differently abled drives me a little bit nuts, just because it's kind of treats disability like a dirty word. So yeah.
I think in terms of you know, equity, inclusion, all those words, it becomes all roles need to have their responsibilities clearly outlined. So for example, diversity officer in one organization might think that their role is mainly to do with race, and then discover that actually people are coming to them with disability issues. So it just needs to be clearly defined and have that information available. At Adelaide, we have gender, equity,
Diversity and inclusion.
And inclusion, the Jedis. So like that role has to encompass everything, and that person ends up being a sort of bucket for all kinds of complaints, and that can be a real burden on that person. So I think it is useful to differentiate them, because it spreads the load, and that could be asking a lot of some people to take on those jobs if it's
and
everything.
it also allows for people to have better expertise in what they're doing. You know, in all of these areas, we need people who are trained to be working in these roles, and you can't just expect one person to be able to do everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, personally, we were saying that, you know, I like to use the term, you know, disabled for my medical conditions and my health conditions as well, because that's, you know, that's what it is. And I think when we stop using those terms, or we stop letting people define what they would like themselves and take that choice away from them, it becomes taboo. It becomes taboo to say the word disabled, when in reality you should be consulting those people who have to live that experience. So we've just got a question from Fiona saying, we were discussing some of the difficulties and differences that online teaching / online environments present, i.e. cameras on or off, communicating online, etc. Do you have any tips or suggestions for being inclusive and accessible when teaching online?
Yeah, so this is, I know it's a real tricky problem. We're all facing it across the world, and we're not going to solve it in one day. But something that I found was, I said, you know, I can't come in, I'm immunocompromised or whatever the situation is. And I was offered, it's okay, we'll put you on the big screen in the room and you can be on Zoom and we'll have you there. I didn't really want to be Big Brother looking over the whole class, because if I wasn't well enough to come in, I was probably in bed. So I really needed to have my camera off there. And so I thought it was good for it to be offered that I could have my camera on if I wanted, but that I didn't have to. And I know it's a problem where students have all of their cameras off and you really struggle to get engagement. Something that I've heard from disabled students that they find effective is the good old discussion boards, but where you can upload a little video or you can write a written, the main thing is the flexibility so that they can contribute, even if that's mandatory or, you know, graded or whatever, in multiple ways. So if you're not going to come to class, you need to do a discussion post or something like that, because if I don't have the capacity to sit up when the class is scheduled, I still want to do that work and I will do it, just at a later time, and written might be the different option. I mean, it's just, it depends on the discipline, it depends on the context, I think. But yeah, flexibility, we love to hear it.
I've just uploaded a couple links to the chat from AdSet. They also have a bunch of other ones surrounding online teaching, whether it's for deaf students or visually impaired students. So I definitely recommend checking out that website. It is a really good resource. Yeah, for me personally, one of the things I love is like a digital whiteboard. It's a really easy way to interact, because you're not worrying about like speaking over the top of each other, because there's that little bit of lag on Zoom that is always a bit of a nightmare. Or Google Docs. Like I had a teacher who I basically showed them how to use Google Docs last year, and we've been doing it ever since. So that's another really good one in terms of collaboration. I guess, yeah, just providing opportunities for collaboration and asking students how they go. Because another thing that happens that is such a big problem with online learning, not just for disabled students, but for everybody, is that tech just never works the way that you expect it to. So, you know, having opportunities for people to give that feedback, and, you know, we're aware that that's not really in the control of teaching staff most of the time, but they usually have a much shorter trip to IT than we do. So, yeah.
Leslie made the point in the chat that options for alternative assessments is a good idea in many contexts. And I did just want to point out that flexibility from the beginning does mean less work for staff, because you're not having to work out alternative accommodations for everyone who needs it. You've already built that into the structure. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's another thing to sort of bring up, something that I do in my classrooms and have been doing for the past 2.5 years that I found so much more helpful. And it is a little bit of extra work, and I understand it is a little bit sometimes an extra burden on students. That's why I make it optional, but I send out Google surveys at the end of each of my you know, classes, because I'm not going to wait all the way till the end of the semester for the CELTs, you know, our teaching evaluations, because I can't change anything by that point. I don't know what's going on, you know, in the classroom. And I know that a lot of students are not going to feel comfortable approaching and saying, oh, can you do this instead? Because then it puts more burden on them. Whereas if they can say it in a safe environment, and it's anonymous and they don't have to worry about it, then I know, okay, well, I can try and fix this.
I love that. And I love the idea of having that open kind of all semester long. We get told by a lot of teaching staff, like, please let us know like before the CELTs, so that we can actually, you know, adapt those changes for you and not just for the next cohort. But then there's not really often a way to do that with the anonymity that you get from CELTs. So having that kind of Google Doc kind of, or Google survey open all the time is really useful for students.
We also do it in our own events, is we'll have like a form, or we do forms for a lot of things, but we do forms after events sometimes, just to go what worked, what didn't. Yeah.
Anyone else in the audience? Yep. Any questions or comments, maybe, or experiences?
Oh, just a comment. If nobody else is going to jump in, something that I brought up in our breakout room, which you mentioned, I think, Shona, was what I've observed and heard from some students is that it's such an isolating experience to have a long extension, and Ola was in my breakout room as well, so she was very kindly giving her experiences of these things. Getting extensions, if you have a sessional tutor, often means that you're not going to get much feedback when you finally submit your piece of work. And it also means that you then don't have the opportunity to ask any students questions as you get closer to submitting, which I think is you know, puts people at a significant disadvantage, because even if their work is going well, they've got no way to tell. They've got no gauge for that. So I wonder if anyone has encountered something that makes that a bit more fair, like sort of an acknowledgement that your sessional teaching staff might be gone by the time a student needs support or feedback. I'd be interested in hearing from anyone in the group if they've observed that or if they've seen anything that sort of can help accommodate it.
I found, sorry, just Joe, because I've got direct experience of it in the education faculty at Melbourne, is that having the subject coordinator aware of it with the students' blessing obviously helped transition and have oversight of that movement between casuals. I don't know if that helps, but that's often having someone who's more permanent being aware of what's going on.
Some kind of handover that's just a little, even if you do have to hand over frequently, just a little extra.
Yeah.
This is going to take them. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, sort of in that situation, there was reluctance to have to explain everything all over again to somebody else. So it's like, oh, okay, I've already told my tutor. Now I have to tell the subject coordinator, you know, because my tutor's gone. And yeah, it's a good point. But I just wonder if it, you know, I doubt it works all the time. But
yeah,
I get,
maybe not. But it's
getting rid of sessionals,
yeah,
making them ongoing.
yes, there it is. That's the answer.
Sorry, Steve, go on.
No,
I'm
just going to back you up on that one.
Cry.
Employ people full time.
Yeah. I agree. And something that I would say is that if, say, you are a tutor or you are a learning advisor in that situation where, you know, your relationship with the student is about to end, what you can do is kind of say, hey, do you want to make a little document where we just have like your little script of what you're going to email your teachers every semester? Well, that would be, I need someone to do that with me, actually.
And even just like acknowledging, like, I know this sucks because I'm asking you to do this again. And some of it's building confidence, because you end up having to have a little script as a student where you go along and you say, here's my deal. So you kind of just put in that support to help them build that script.
Yeah, creating that template, that means they don't have to do all the work over and over and over again. And also, you know, then if you're doing it with them, they know that it's professional enough looking and it's appropriate enough looking, and they're not oversharing or undersharing. You know, they don't have to worry about all those things because it's already been ticked off by somebody. So that can be really helpful. Have it on a QR code. I love that. That's good too. Yeah. One of the most helpful things that a course coordinator has done for me was they actually reached out to my disability advisor and asked, how can I help this student? And I was like amazed by that, because I'd never known of any other coordinators doing that. So that's also an option.
Yeah, I think the casual tutoring is definitely the clincher there, because as a casual tutor myself and casual professional staff member, that's one of the hardest things, is that, you know, I was very honest with my students, and I think if you are a casual, you should be. I think you should tell them, like, I'm casual. I'm not actually technically in my contract paid to respond to your emails. I'm not paid to send out things, and I'm only paid to physically be there, give you the class and mark your work. And when I do mark your work, I'm given 20 minutes per assignment. Just to clarify for those who've been in long-term employment for a long time, it's 5,000 words per hour, Adelaide.
Oh yeah. That was no criticism on my part to the tutor as well. That was
that's important, because it sets expectations is the thing. And I was talking in my breakout room, we were talking about the issue with mutual disclosure, where a student says, hey, I've got this issue, and the staff member says, don't worry, I understand, I have another issue. And that builds a relationship. And then you're doing that thing where you rip that relationship away again just when that student started to trust you. So I think setting expectations is important.
Yeah. I do think, as Fiona said, as learning advisors, learning advisors are in a really good position to contribute to that, and to be, I mean, depending on how you're employed, I don't know how you're employed at all the different universities, but potentially that's a relationship that can expand, you know, can go on longer than just one semester, or can bridge those gaps. And personally, when I have discussions with learning advisors, it's a really good like practice as well. It gives me more experience with interacting with professional staff and with teaching staff, and it really builds my confidence.
Yeah, we before we move on to Anna, she's just got her hand raised and she has a question.
Oh yes, sorry, Anna.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think disclosing, you know, if you're a seasonal academic is super important for expectations, because I've actually been quite shocked when I've taught first year students like fresh out of high school who assumed that I was paid like a high school teacher and I was fully employed. So if I didn't say to them, actually, no, that's not the case, I'm casual and this is what I'm paid for, they had no idea. So their expectations of what they were expecting me to do was as though I am their high school teacher. So yeah.
I will say, oh, sorry, last thing, Tiana, on that note, when you do disclose that to students though, please do give them another option. So say you should speak to the learning advisor, because if you just say that to a student, and I've definitely had teaching staff say that to me before, I think it's completely reasonable, but then I'm kind of left with, okay, well, what I need is teaching and I don't know where to go. So yeah, definitely tell them where to go. Don't just say, sorry, I can't. Yeah.
That would be very mean. So Anna, we've got a question from you.
Yes, and a bit of a comment. Thank you very, very much for the presentation today, because the more we talk about these things, the more we change our culture. I think it's important to understand. It's like with what we've been doing with post-entry English language assessment, where at some point it was not normal. And then in many universities, it's now part of their transitioning to their first year, you know, into the classes. But I just wanted to be very honest. I am a full-time professional staff member, and I'm looking at the links. I'm looking at what our audit said a year ago about our resources. And I'm thinking, when am I going to do this? How am I going to do this if I don't have IT support, etc. I was just thinking that maybe the association can, I love this series where we inspire and share, but maybe we could have some hands-on, very practical sessions on this is how we could make this more accessible. And this is an academic language development resource that we've made more accessible, something like that. So I think it would be really appreciated. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I know Mr. Google is there to help, but still, yeah.
Actually, thank you for that, because I was thinking along the same lines. Because at ACU, we've been working for a long time on building accessibility into our online resources. And most of our resources have some kind of interactive element. So it is a lot of work. But we do have some ideas, and we'd love to hear other people who have ideas. I'm responsible for organizing a session for May for this for this series. So you're just given a great idea. So if people are interested in hands-on session like that, yeah, came up with the topic. Yep, great.
Oh, sorry, Tiana.
Okay, I think Steve, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, something Orla said before sort of prompted a thought about the notion of the relationship with the academic advisor, and that whenever I've had a student who has either had a disclosed or a visual disability or a disclosed non-visual disability, I've always said at the end of the session, presuming it went well, and they always have, thank God, would it help you to stay with me as your advisor when you did need an advisor? And they've always said, yes, that'd be great. That'd be great. You know how I work. I don't have to explain it to someone again. I've said, fine, whenever you need a booking, you contact me directly and I'll set it up. And that has always been really well received. And I'd like to make it, because one of my roles at Melbourne is oversight of our one-to-one services. I'd like to make it our policy that we do that as a matter of course, rather than as a matter of opportunity. So I just want Orla to let you know that that does happen. And a lot of us do think that way.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear, because that's actually what has been made available to me over the last year. Michael, who's here, is the leader of the writing centre at the moment. He is just covering his eyes. And Yeah, so I did have my writing centre tutor offer to do like weekly appointments with me, which was really good because one of the main barriers to access was just that I couldn't get an appointment. And when you book an appointment, you don't know who you're booking with. So, you know, and they're only half an hour. So it's a whole thing. But yeah, definitely like make that suggestion. And then the other thing I would say, so an issue that came up with that for me was that when my writing advisor said, yeah, this is something we can do. We just need your disability advisor to like recommend it. And then I went to my disability advisor and they were like, oh, but that's not possible. Like, that's not a thing that happens. And I said, no, it is. And it was literally months of emailing back and forth. So I guess maybe if the advisor could send an email to the disability advisor, like I know that that's more work, but it would be a much more direct way to make that thing happen, because that's often what happens is like people suggest things that would be great, but then you ask for them and nobody believes you. So that's that's just another anecdote.
I had a similar, just another anecdote of going between like where disabilities, our library shut down during COVID and I couldn't physically access in my wheelchair and I couldn't get requests, and then I told disability and disability said we haven't heard of that problem, and then it was back and forth, and every single time I spoke to someone from the library it was a different person, so I ended up with 8 people CC'd in, and it got sorted eventually. But this is the kind of thing that students are doing, is just going back and forth and back and forth, and it would just sometimes it's great to just be walked down the hall and told this is the person you need to speak to.
Especially when really so many of our issues are exacerbated by the fact that we are taking on more than we can chew because we don't really have a choice. Like, I would love to just be a part-time student, but if I do that, I won't get a student payment and then I won't be able to live. So this is, the centrelink stuff, the staffing stuff, the money stuff comes into it for students very much as well.
I think we just have one last question from Tom, and then we're going to start wrapping it up.
Yeah, just a comment. So often the student is introduced to us as the LLAs by a disability advisor who has access to their access plan. And it's kind of anonymous in that the student isn't looped into those emails. They're not CC'd. And they were kind of forestall some of the issues that Orla and Shona were talking about. If they were, I think, we could just say, okay, I'll be, when we reply, okay, I'm happy to see this student on an ongoing basis or something like that. It seems to be, there's a lot of unnecessary email communication. I don't know if anyone is a disability advisor. Is that impractical? That we just, the first email says, I'm recommending this student see you, and the students CC.
I just want to jump in and say one of the things that we do at DIDA is we advocate for things, and we advocate for things like more funding. So if it is too much for disability support to do that and it's not within the job capacity, then something we can do as a collective is say, hey, we're not getting what we need, and we need it. So we find we really have to cultivate staff-student solidarity. And you guys have information that we don't have access to, and we have an ability to say things that you can't because you're bound by the institution that employs you. So I think it works when we work together, that we need help from you guys and you guys need help from us. So yeah, I think, just to jump back to the series is about inspiring. I think it's about connecting with each other and working out if it's too much work, where can we push that to have more capacity.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so this we're about to wrap it all up now, and we do have a survey that we would like you all to fill out that I've just sent in the chat box there, and we also have a Zoom poll. So if everyone could very quickly before they leave fill this out, will give us a little bit more data so that we can organise a really great event for next time. So while everyone's doing that, I just want to say thank you so much, Shona and Orla, for your time, and thank you for everyone for attending. I think this has been a really insightful presentation, and I hope that, as learning advisors, we can, try and advocate and do more in this space for, for these students.
Tiana, just a question. This voting on times, are these times in AEBT?
ST, not AEB. Yep.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Thank
Like
you
I've said, as a dyslexic, time zones don't even get me started. I've got no idea.
It's
Sorry,
constant.
we're a bit East Coast centric on this one. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, I think if you filled out the quiz and if you've done the Zoom poll, then you're free to go. And we'll be sending, maybe we'll email through the worksheet that Shona and Orla provided Steve, and we can just send that out either later today or later in the week so that everyone's got a copy just in case you weren't able to access it.
And the next session is March 22. It'll be advertised, don't worry. And it's going to be run by a couple of learning advisors from Melbourne, Hilary Dolan and Ha Nguyen, and it's on story circles. It's borrowed from Indigenous knowledges about sharing your story. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, so you'll be hearing about that shortly.
Will it be 3:30 to 5, Steve?
It will depend on the poll, Anna.
The
Okay,
survey is
thank you.
looking like 3:30 to 5, 41. Oh, should I show the results?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll launch it. Share result.
Yep. Oh, okay. That looks like the 3:30 to 5 is the one people like.
Well, we've all stayed, so people who've left already, maybe they should get the same question asked, but it looks like.
Maybe we can run a couple on different times, but sort of maybe every second one. I don't know, but
Okay.
yeah, maybe we can talk about it at the committee.
Yep.
Thanks. Just as head of committee, I want to say thanks to Tiana.